Hello there and welcome along to this week's edition of the Racing Post show, The Front Page. I'm your host Maddy Playle for this week and I'm joined by Chris Cook and Jonathan Harding to review a blockbuster Dublin Racing Festival. It was an absolutely spectacular 2 days of action at Leopardstown, and also later on we're going to be asking for your help with our Big Punting Survey, so stay tuned so you can find out more on that. So without further ado, we're going to go straight into the best talking point of all really, which is the performances on track. Galopin Des Champs is our obvious place to start in that he was absolutely phenomenal, winning a third Irish Gold Cup, paved the way for a double treble for Willie Mullins with State Man the following day in the Irish Champion Hurdle. But first off, I'm going to throw to you, Jonathan. Galopin Des Champs, it's difficult to know what to say about this horse anymore because he's just the complete racehorse. What do you think this performance added to an already sparkling legacy for him?
Well, you know, we're having that conversation now about whether he is up there with the greats. I think the likes of Corto Star, he's a little bit old, so whether he'll maybe reach that record of grade ones, I don't know. But he has to be in the conversation because he was absolutely fantastic. And if you don't want to take my word for it, when Willie Mullins is saying he's the best chaser he's ever trained, and then almost half suggesting maybe he might be the best horse he's ever trained as well, you know, it's like Sir Alex Ferguson picking out the best players he ever managed. You sort of take their word for it. They know what they're talking about, and it was a hugely impressive performance. I don't think it was the strongest Irish Gold Cup that he's won. He's now obviously won 3 of those. But
you don't? Why don't you think it's the strongest one?
I just think when we're looking at the ratings in the cold light of day, I don't think that, you know, whether he beat the same calibre of horses, but he still had to put some very good horses to the sword there, and it is hard now to think that he'll be beaten in the Gold Cup, particularly with the news this morning that Jerry Colombe's out for the season.
Oh, I missed that.
Yes, there you go. Breaking news.
Do we think that would have made much of a difference to the Gold Cup?
Probably not at this stage, but I mean it's another big name. If you had a nice lumpy bet on Galopin Des Champs, he'd be one that you'd probably worry about. But realistically, I think we probably already knew he wasn't quite good enough, I think
so, and Gordon Elliott had problems with him throughout the season, hadn't he, not been able to get him right, etc. Galopin Des Champs, his task is looking easier by the minute, really. Factophile, he gave it a go, eventually lost out for second from Grangeclair West, but do we think it's now Ryanair for him?
Grangeclair?
No, for Factophile.
Yes, he's 2-1 favourite for the Ryanair, isn't he? So evidently the betting market thinks that's the way he's going to go.
In a way, I kind of think, should he just, go for gold again,
So here we're already getting into that territory where, because he's in that stable, you can see the logic of going for a different race. But, if he was anyone else's horse, he'd be their #1 Gold Cup horse and there wouldn't even be a conversation about it. So that's what you lose from having one really, really immensely powerful stable. But, the Ryanair is going to be a really interesting race. There will be some depth in that race, especially if he turns up there. I was really pleased by Grangeclair West running so well, because it was this weekend last year when we sort of lost him. He got cast in his box and missed the race he was supposed to turn up for. And I was thinking at the time, oh, well, that's, a bit of bad timing, rotten luck, but we'll see him again the next month. But as it turned out, he injured himself badly enough for that to end the season, and his comeback run was really disappointing. It's great to see him back now running at the sort of level that you hoped he was going to achieve, when he was so impressive 2 Christmases ago. And you think, maybe there might be some scope for him to come on again, because he's sort of allowed to coast into that race, really. And in the end, he was only beaten by Galopin about the same distance that he was behind at the second last. He's a proper stayer, I think, by the looks of him. Another 2 furlongs in the Cheltenham Hill. Probably quite good news for him. So I don't think it's ridiculous to say that he could close the gap at Cheltenham, assuming that they put him in the Gold Cup. I guess they'll want to have that discussion about what's the right target for him. From the perspective of Willie, he's got Galopin Des Champs, he loves him, he wants him to be a 3-time Gold Cup winner. He could probably do without providing a serious danger from his own yard. And
that's where we're at now, isn't it?
I'm afraid that's the realistic way to think about it. So, he might be tempted to save Grangeclair for the bowl at Aintree, say, or to come up with another alternative target. But I think from any neutral perspective. You really want to see Grangeclare in the Gold Cup and have that chance of going to Cheltenham this time and proving, actually how good he is. 20-1 non-runner no bet, if you can get that, quite appeals to me.
You say that. Thanks for teeing me up, Chris. We'll give you some Gold Cup betting. Galopin Des Champs now 8-13 best price. Factorfile 6-1, as we've mentioned, he may go to the Ryanair. Banbridge, well, they announced he'd be going for the Gold Cup, which surprised me a little bit during the week. He's a 10-1 chance. Corbett's Cross at 20s. Grangeclare West, best price 25s. So too L'Empresse, Monty's Star, Grey Dawning, who now isn't going to run at the Cheltenham Festival. Ile Francais, he was scratched from the Gold Cup this morning, so that's another shufty about in the anti-post markets at 33s. And then you're down to the likes of Jungle Boogie and Embassy Gardens at 40s and bigger. So opposition is falling away, Jonathan. I don't think we're rich enough, frankly, to be getting involved at the 8-13 Galopin Des Champs. But
No.
He's a special horse. There were some feathers ruffled before the meeting when we ran a piece sort of saying he's not quite captured the public's hearts in the way that Constitution Hill has, and that got quite a little bit of flack, I think, afterwards. And the scenes at Leopardstown were phenomenal. Paul Townend saying that he could actually hear the crowd when he was jumping at the third last, I think it was. Do you now not buy that? Do you think he's really special, and in the way Honeysuckle did, do you think he stirs the Irish public and the British public in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't buy it before he ran. I think Constitution Hill is clearly very popular and he's a big name, but we don't see him, or we haven't been able to see him quite as often as we would have liked, whereas Galopin Des Champs we do get to see frequently, and he's clearly incredibly popular. I mean, how you can't be stirred by a horse that just turbocharges after the last like that, it's machine-like. And clearly he got a huge reception in Ireland. I remember him winning the Gold Cup in March, and he got a huge reception at Cheltenham too, so I don't really buy it. I think I've always felt, and this is completely based on nothing, as most of my opinions are, but I just think there's something about the big strapping staying chaser who is dominant at their fences, who has that turn of foot towards the end of their races that really does cut through with people and racing fans in particular. And he's bang up there popularity wise. And as for the allays after the race, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Love a bit of chanting after a race. More of that, please.
Yeah, we had that conversation, didn't we, after Cheltenham a few years ago, with people saying that they didn't want to go home, etc. It upset some people, but we like that in this room. Jonathan, you're going to take us through some other key performances from the chasers at the DRF.
Yeah, so we'll stick to Saturday in the interests of keeping things chronological. Majborough in the Irish Arkle. A good performance. Jumping was a little bit sketchy at times, but look, he's a novice chaser, you're allowed the odd one, but he's clearly got a hell of an engine. He got a decent rating after that, 164. I think he'll give Sergino something to think about, but he is going to have to tidy up his jumping a little bit for me to threaten him in March. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, watching the race, when he made two consecutive, I suppose you could call them errors down the back straight, he was sort of giving himself an extra stride, wasn't he? And then sort of going through the fence instead of over it. And then he did something similar a couple of fences after that. And my first instinct was, oh well, that's really probably cooked him. They're going to be on him any second. And he just ran away from them, didn't he? It seemed to have no sort of cumulative effect. Maybe that's the sort of, the original 1980s racing fan in me that just expected, when you bash a couple of fences, that's the end of your chance, especially in the context of a 2-mile novice chase.
You're doing when I were a kid.
Well, I'm sorry about it, but we're stuck with the reality that that's how far back I go. And I know I'm not alone in this. I slightly regret the fact that the fences are not as stiff as they used to be in Ireland or in Britain. I think probably especially in Britain, but you used always to be able to rely on the fact that in Ireland you get proper fences. I think 30 or 40 years ago he'd have paid more of a price for jumping like that.
And do you think that's a development that needed to happen and that you approve of, or do you wish for the good old days?
I mean, that's a 5-hour conversation. But I would like the fences to be a bit stiffer. I don't see it happening for various, political reasons. Plus, also out of fairness to the horses, once they get used to a certain standard of the fence, they change the way they jump. They learn that they don't have to respect them as much. When the fences were stiffer, they were giving them a bit more air. he will already have learned what he can do with these fences and get away with it. He's clearly got a heck of an engine. But there's going to be that risk, if he doesn't improve his jumping. It's like an El Fabiolo situation. Remember, he went to the last festival unbeaten over fences and then did that. So you're always going to be asked to take a short price about a horse like Majborough. And I don't know if it will necessarily include the risk that something might go wrong at one of the fences.
I think it was interesting because he was making his own pace and he looked very comfortable. So I think, why was he almost making it look more difficult than it needed to? Do you know what I mean? In his novice chase, he was very smooth, and yet there was just something a little bit stuttering. Not, you'd be hard pushed to say even mistakes, but just not totally fluent. So I wonder if he is put into that cauldron of an Arkle with all that pace, pressure, and the atmosphere of the festival, whether that could elicit a mistake from him.
It could be, yeah. I mean, and against Sergino, he's going to be under more pressure than he's ever been. So I mean, that's a really interesting race to look forward to. Although, again, it's a bit of a two-horse race, which, as we saw over the weekend, those can disappoint you for various reasons.
If only we were going straight into that. A little bit later on, we'll be discussing Stateman's victory in the Irish Champion Hurdle. But Jonathan, a little bit more on the chasers first. Ballyburn, and then another upset in the 2 mile chasing division in Solness, winning his second Grade 1 this season.
Yeah, so look, we'll start with Ballyburn. He was a little bit exuberant and keen to begin with, I think, because he's obviously raced over 2 miles last time, and they're clearly trying to get him to settle. It wasn't as visually impressive a performance as perhaps the others of those Willie Mullins Grade 1 winners. It was just a little bit, he had to dig deeper than perhaps you might have expected. He was slightly trimmed for the Brown, I was about to call it the RSA, Brown Advisory.
Call it the RSA by all means. Call it the Royal Sun Alliance.
Perfect. And he just got the job done. And that's probably a little bit unfair. Ballyburn's a horse I absolutely love. I think he's the one that, we're talking about maybe a credible threat to Galopin Des Champs down the line. I just think, he's the one to beat in that Brown Advisory, but I don't think it's as clear-cut as perhaps some of those other novice chasers. If
the Jukebox Man hadn't been ruled out for the season, then that certainly would have been very interesting, wouldn't it? So a shame that he's a goner, Chris. Ballyburn, he's one of these who has always attracted public attention, I think, and hype.
Yeah.
For me, I find it interesting they've gone up in trip, and he looked very much like a stayer, even though he was up 5.5 furlongs on over the weekend.
Finished quite
for me,
strong.
I want to, it's something that's just not quite clicking for me. I was expecting him to push Croke Park out of the way, and he didn't straight away.
Willie said something interesting afterwards about how, the importance was to get the horse settled, and he could see that once Paul had got the horse finally settled, he didn't dare move on him, for fear of setting him off again. And if you watch the race again with that in the back of your mind, I think it makes a bit more sense what happened. The jockey doesn't really ask until they've landed over the last. And then the horse clearly has a bit more in hand. That being said, in a race where it's more of a stamina test, you could see Croke Park making more of a race of it. It wasn't like he was getting huggled at the end. And that, racing like Ballyburn does, if he doesn't learn to calm down, and he's had a lot of racing now for a horse that still behaves that way, so he probably is going to carry on being that way. A 3 mile race at Cheltenham, maybe he is going to overdo it.
He's not an easy horse to ride, is he? He's got that very low head carriage, very keen, sort of takes a while. I imagine he takes a bit of knowing, and no one better for the job than Paul Townend, of course. He wasn't aboard the Dublin Chase winner, though. That was Danny Mullins aboard Solness. Another surprise coming from this horse, Jonathan, and he is just another angle in a fascinating Champion Chase picture. So much pace, this horse. That's the thing. He's marmalised them from the front again.
Yeah, you talk about almost the opposite of Ballyburn. Solness would be fantastic to ride because the instructions are quite clear. Just go off, hell for leather. And it's just proved that wasn't a fluke over Christmas, and why not have a crack at the Champion Chase? Obviously, John Bon will take a lot of beating. I think that's probably fair to say. He strikes me as still top of the tree in terms of 2 mile chasers in Britain and Ireland. But as we've discussed on here before, Cheltenham, there are a few little question marks about whether he's at his best at Cheltenham, and I think he'll need to be at his best taking on a Solness or even an Ile-Francais, or if the pace is as we expect it to be, which is going to be pretty relentless with those two turning up, then it's going to take a lot of winning, that Champion Chase. And a little word for Joseph O'Brien. I love Joseph O'Brien. Get it on a T-shirt. I just think he's so understated, does it in both codes. He's a great jockey, he's a great trainer, and it's good to see a little bit of, another yard that's not Willie Mullins, with all due respect to the great man. You do need a bit of variety in those grade ones, and Joseph O'Brien and Gavin Cromwell have provided it at the weekend.
Yeah, you're sort of lifting off from two pieces I wrote there, because I wrote about Joseph doing an amazing.
That's where most of it comes from. Your work.
You've stolen it. No, but he's had a fantastic
I was
season.
enjoying you saying that was a surprise result after you tipped the winner on Saturday.
Well, it was a surprise to a lot of people, wasn't it? It's
gonna
not
bring that
often. No, I wasn't. I'm far too sort of earnest for that. But
do you know what's really embarrassing is that even after I read that, I backed Gallic Warrior right before the race started. And, I mean, that might be one of the dumbest bets I've ever placed.
What do you do with him now, Gaelic Warrior?
Well, I don't know. I mean, presumably they've got some idea between themselves about why he ran that way. I was surprised at the ride. I mean, I really was hoping that he might be asked to keep closer tabs on the runaway leader, who just.
Well, there were some suggestions that the jockeys on the beaten horses should be a bit embarrassed. What say you to that?
Listen, you'd like to hear what they had to say afterwards. But yeah, watching it from the perspective of someone who had money on Gallic Warrior, like I say, I was really hoping he might keep closer order. Leopardstone's a track where, if the ground isn't bottomless, something that goes off in front that's got a bit of quality can just keep going. And I did feel, as early as the start of the back straight, that they'd given him too much rope.
I thought Marie National was coming, having supported him at the last. I thought we're a goner here, but he's so brave, isn't he?
There's a big one in him, isn't there? He's been a little bit slow to the boil over fences, but every performance so far has been an improvement on the last. I think there's definitely a big race in him.
Yeah.
A bit like Grange Clare West, he's another one that we've got back now, it feels, so that's good news.
Yeah. But my point was, similar to what you said, Joseph O'Brien had an amazing season, given that he doesn't focus on the jumps anymore, had home by the lead. The stuff he's done with that horse is brilliant, and Solness as well. And then also the champion chase is pace. You look at the horses who are likely to line up there. Gaelic Warrior, if he does go, well, he's gone forward in the past. Energumine's gone forward in the past. Solness, we know he's going to go forward. Then you've got Matata, who went forward the other day. I'm hoping Ile Francais, as I say earlier, he was removed from the Gold Cup this morning. I'm hoping they go for the champion chase, and it's going to be a real burn-up for John Bon. So I think it's a fascinating picture building for Cheltenham, Chris.
And just tangentially, what's on my mind there is that with John Bon having gone odds on, that means that Nicky Henderson's now got 3 odds on favourites for grade ones at the Cheltenham Festival, which is quite a situation to be in. Given we've been talking about how hard it is for everyone else to get a look in those quality races. But he's definitely punching his weight.
It really does paint a contrasting picture from the Cheltenham Festival last year, wasn't it? Where Nicky just had a dreadful week with his horses and the stable out of form. Some of them ran, but most of the ones towards the end of the week were pulled out. Can he forget that awful experience of last year?
You'll never forget
it. This year with a an absolute haul at the festival.
I mean, he's probably not watching this, but if he was, you've just turned his hair a little bit whiter, I should think, because this equivalent stage a year ago, I'm sure he thought that everything was fine. And, we hadn't seen the sort of first inklings of any kind of form problems from that stable. So they always talk about how the last 6 weeks up to the festival are the jitteriest of all if you've got serious horses to go there. And especially for him, that goes double for Nicky Henderson this year.
It certainly does. Now, Jonathan's took care of the big chasing performances. Now I'm going to lift off and talk about the hurdlers. The first one, the obvious one to discuss, is of course State Man, who was the second part of that double treble in winning his 3rd Irish Champion hurdle on Sunday. This was a bit of a damp squib in the end, wasn't it? Lossiemouth was sent off the favourite to beat him. Paul Townend had stayed loyal. It was Danny Mullins in the spotlight once again, but not quite in the way he wanted when the mare came crashing down at a 3 out. A terrible fall. Great to hear that she is okay, but by that time State Man and Lossiemouth had established a clear lead over their inferior rivals, and State Man was left to coast home, really. It was so early on in the piece, it's hard to know exactly what would have happened. State Man was certainly coming up to Lossiemouth's girth after she'd cut out much of the early running at that stage in the race. Would he have swept by her, or with the £7 allowance, would she have justified that favouritism to shake up Willie Mullins' champion hurdle pack? I was in the camp very much that I wanted to be on Lossiemouth, especially getting that weight, and given the disappointments that we've seen from State Man this season. And now, do we know whether he was back to his best or not? Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, we might find out in March, mightn't we, with Lossiemouth and State Man taking each other on and potentially Constitution Hill another 5 or 10 lengths in front.
Whoa.
That's a straightforward answer, yeah.
I mean, do you know, the good thing that came out of this was that their initial reaction was Lossiemouth still goes for the champion hurdle, right? And
agreed.
So if we can have both her and State Man against Constitution Hill, then that's a proper race. I sense a lot of disappointment from our colleagues reading today's paper. And I think in context that makes sense, that we've had the whole Dublin Racing Festival sort of building up to that race. I kept, as a spectator watching from afar, I kept waiting for it to catch fire as a race meeting, and I wasn't really sure in the end that it did.
Do you think that the Irish Gold Cup needs to be on the Sunday? Swap those two races around? Some suggestion of that, and I think that would make sense.
I wouldn't object to that at all. I think at the moment there's a certain lack of competition with so many of the horses being in one yard. That's a big part of it. Quite a few of those Grade 1s were won really handily. I mean, the 2 novice hurdles, I think the winning distances were 12 lengths and 13 lengths. Mm-hmm. The 2 novice chases that Willie won were, by daylight again. 8 Grade 1s, of which half were won by an odds-on shot. I know that there's a constituency out there for people who want to admire really good horses, impressing, and that's great. But that's not personally why I got into the game. I like the drama and a sense of suspense, and horses basically fighting all the way out to the line. And we didn't quite get that in the quality races. Obviously, the handicaps were different. And so I think that when you get to State Man versus Lossiemouth, people were thinking, this is going to be the battle all the way up the straight that we've been waiting for all weekend, and take the roof off the grandstand, and then she falls at the third last. If you've got a 2-horse jumps race, I mean, I know there were 3 others in the race, but they let them go, didn't they, those 3?
I was surprised by how close they got at the end. I know State Man, it's hard to judge him, but...
Well, but then they
thought he was
they weren't
weakening
given a lot
all
to
the way.
do. I mean, you have to put that in the context that he's racing against Lossiemouth and really going for it as far as the third last. So he's done a lot more work than they have.
That's true.
But yeah, I just think if you basically got a 2-horse jumps race, one of the things that can happen is that one of them makes a jumping mistake that ends the contest. You have to count yourself lucky if those races are decided in the final strides.
And that is the game.
Yeah, absolutely, it's the game. There's going to be one moment in the race that decides it, and you're going to go from not knowing what's going to happen until immediately knowing what's happened, and it'll take like a second. And so it happened at the third last. It might have happened at the furlong pole. That's the way it goes. To me, it didn't actually take from the race. I was just glad to see her get up, because it was a mother and father of a fall,
But she'd never displayed jumping frailties of that degree before. Do we simply rule this as an anomaly and nothing to worry about in future, Jonathan?
I think you have to. I'll always forgive a horse one bad run or a fall, or I think it's just the law of averages.
You can say that because you don't have to get on her the next time.
Well, that's it, yeah, but just as a law of averages, isn't it? I think these things do happen. They were going at a decent clip, and it's just one of those. I think a momentary lapse of whatever happened. I don't think it's a problem for me personally. And I think, I'm slightly flippant about State Man and Lossiemouth. I think that they are 2 seriously good horses, and ideally they would both be in the champion hurdle, because I think that would just add to that race enormously. State Man doesn't quite get the respect he deserves. He's a credible challenge, I think, come March, and it was good to see him get back to winning ways, albeit in not ideal circumstance.
Yeah. I mean, with Lossiemouth, it actually might end up being a helpful thing for her, because she's one of those really quality athletes who's maybe had it just a bit easy up till now. Maybe she's taken the jumping for granted, and maybe this will get her focused for her future races now that she's had that experience.
What do we think Paul Townend's going to do if they both go for the champion hurdle? That's a tricky one, isn't it?
Flip a coin.
Well, he made his choice, didn't he? And he's ended up thinking it was the right one. So probably in that situation, you have to stick with State Man, don't you?
You think he's going to stick with him again?
I think he's more or less bound.
I'd make that favourite. Yeah, I think it says a lot that he chose State Man this time, and I sense the yard still, for all they've. I believe I hope this is right, where Willie Mullins suggesting that Lossiemouth would still go for the champion hurdle afterwards, or that they're certainly leaning that way. I still think that State Man is viewed as their main contender.
Okay, fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we didn't get many answers to the questions on Sunday in the Irish Champion Hurdle, but that makes Cheltenham even more interesting. In terms of betting reaction, we'll give you some prices. Constitution Hill 4 to 7 from 8 to 11. Lossiemouth ease slightly if you are interested in her for that Champion Hurdle, 4 to 1 from 11 to 4. And State Man, kind of a bit of a token clipping at 7s from 8s. That certainly wouldn't be interesting me, gents. If you had to have a bet, let's not talk about the winner, because I think you'd all just say Constitution Hill. But if we had to have a bet or an angle to the Champion Hurdle before we move on to the rest of the hurdlers, who would it be?
Lossiemouth is still interesting, I think. For all, backing a horse after a fall does come with its risks. I think she was the one that we were talking about. Where's Brighter Days Ahead going? Definitely Mares. If Brighter Days Ahead lined up, I think.
You think so? I'm not believing a word until it's.
I think Brighter Days Ahead
done.
For me is the one is sort of the unknown in there that could be interesting. But of the State Man and Lossiemouth, I think Lossiemouth with the allowance.
Okay, you've not really given me an answer there.
I'll just back all of them.
Brighter Days Ahead or Lossiemouth? The Mares, Team Mare you are.
I'm Team Mares, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I can't see how you get Constitution Hill beat at the moment. But I don't know if I'm taking a short price about a horse that's still got to jump around, There's
he made his own mistake at Cheltenham, of course.
Just to keep us interested, yeah. I think it might be a race to just watch with your hands in your pockets, You can't bet on all 20, well, you can bet on all 28 races at the festival, but I don't propose to.
Okay, and from a spectacular performance from State Man, an 11th Grade 1, even though Lossiemouth fell, he deserves all the plaudits indeed for a brilliant career, and great to see him back in the winner's enclosure. Willie Mullins' domination, that was another treble on the weekend. If you were worried that perhaps the future firepower wasn't there from Closterton, think again, because the novice ranks were turned on their head with Final Demand absolutely bolting up in the 2-mile-6 novice hurdle. That Grade 1 is now a 5 to 2 chance for the Turners, 7 to 4 for the Albert Bartlett. To me, this was a performance which screamed, actually, I've got more pace than the usual Albert Bartlett runner. Dancing City, who won the race last year, went on to run in the Albert Bartlett. To me, he looked like a Turner's horse, Chris. But for me, the thing about this horse that sticks out is his physicality. He looks like a real tank, very strong, very well proportioned, and I'm a stickler for those kind of horses who take your eye from the moment you see them. He had this field catered for at a very early stage. Yes, he has the stamina that saw him stretch away in the closing stages, but to me, he's almost too good for an Albert Bartlett.
Okay, I was with you right up until that last bit. There's nothing wrong with an Albert
There's
Bartlett.
not, but too fast then, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. You probably aren't looking to go up and trip if you don't have to with a horse like him. So I think he fits very nicely into the intermediate hurdle race. But I mean, maybe you're thinking that he's just marking time over hurdles. Is it all about
a little,
the future with him?
That doesn't mean he can't be a fantastic chaser. I think it's interesting given the other horses, one of which we'll get on into in a moment, that Willie Mullins has at his disposal, because he's going to have to split them up somehow. And the natural place for these horses is not necessarily where they will end up going.
Sure, but he'd be one of the horses that gets first choice, I think, and he's going to be favourite wherever he rocks up. And it's interesting that the Wingman, who was a sort of forlorn second in that race over the weekend, I think he's gone fab for the Coral Cup with a couple of firms now.
Right.
So they're sort of, which is quite inventive thinking, isn't it? I don't know if that race was mentioned by connections, but yeah, you could see that. And so, there's a race that's already thrown up 2 Cheltenham Festival favourites.
Do you think this is also just going to go to Cheltenham, John, and just win, and that's that, and it's all sorted for? I mean, we've got a very good novice in Britain in the New Lion, of course. If he does go to the Turners, he's likely going to face him.
Yeah, you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, really, when you say he'll just go there and win, because if he wins, then you don't look particularly clever, and if he loses, I look quite foolish. But
listen,
I do
everyone's going to have forgotten at 6
That's the name of the game.
Well, in which case,
you can say what you like.
I think visually that was hugely impressive, and I think he will certainly go off as favourite in whichever race he turns up in, and I think he will win. I think the New Lion, there is scope for improvement from him, of course, but I think now Final Demand's the one to beat if he lines up in the Turners.
Okay, let's talk about Kopek Des Bordes then, the horse who didn't jump very well at all on his hurdling debut. Put that behind him on Sunday with a spectacular performance. I don't know whether it's recency bias talking here, but I really thought this was one of the wow performances of the whole Dublin Racing Festival. He was swiftly put up as a 7-4 favourite for the Supreme, but connections also have Salvatore Mundi, and then you've got Final Demand to fit in. So how does this work? Because for me, Kopek Des Bordes, that was a performance which puts him miles and miles clear of Salvatore Mundi. Connections aren't seeming to think that. Willie Mullins still thinks that Salvatore Mundi is a real Supreme horse, though. Will they be forced to change tack?
Or run them both?
I think Willie.
But if you can win 2 races at the Cheltenham Festival or 3, do you go, let's try and win 3?
Did he have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the Turners last year? I mean, he's happy running a few horses in these novice hurdles and the Triumph hurdle as well. So I think that's probably how it's going to end up here. Looking back, I feel a twinge of regret because Kopek Des Bordes was available, I think, 10-1 for the Supreme yesterday morning. So I mean, he's really been a dramatic shortener. You could have got 20s after the Christmas race if you had enough foresight. And I look back at it again. His hurdling was really sort of hesitant, but he might have been affected by the leader, who was also a bit erratic at Christmas. Whatever the case, they've obviously done a lot of work on it, and he looked so much more polished. I mean, he's still a chaser in the making, right?
His technique at the final hurdle, I thought that's a horse who wants to be jumping a fence.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But I mean, he's slick enough to win a Supreme, and I certainly wouldn't want to be betting against him after that. You know, well done to those people who took a price. Just 10-1 in the context of a horse that was odds on to win that race yesterday, which has been so influential in the past. We ought to have seen that coming, shouldn't we?
Yes, we really should have.
Okay.
Yes.
Another cause for embarrassment.
Yeah, well, just put it on the list.
Right.
In the same race, Redemption Day, very good bumper horse, proved that jumping is the name of the game. He didn't jump particularly well. Jasmine DeVoe in one of the other novice hurdles, again, he was a little bit sticky. That cost him. So it's not always a given that these horses will improve with racing, but with Kopek Des Bordes, it very much was. It was a different kettle of fish, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's made such a difference too. But yeah, just sharper all around. He's obviously going to be a major talent to be reckoned with. I think, if you wanted to say performance of the weekend, I wouldn't argue.
I think that's fair. It's interesting, isn't it? We've gone from saying, well, Britain might have a chance at the Presbyterian Cup this year, and Nicky Henderson's got 3 odds-on favourites, as Chris said no less than 5 minutes ago, and then we talk about the Dublin Racing Festival and the absolute embarrassment of riches at Willie Mullins' yard. Do you think it's going to be another relatively uncompetitive festival? Do you think it's going to be a Mullins benefit at March?
Well, look, he's going to win a few races, isn't he? Unless he suffers the kind of bad luck that Nicky Henderson had last year that we wouldn't wish on anybody. We want all of these horses to turn up in the peak condition, and then we find out who's best. I do this thing where I keep track of who's got how many favourites through the course of the jump season. It's maybe not as stark a picture as you might imagine. Willie's got 8 Cheltenham Festival favourites at the moment. The equivalent stage of last year, he had 12. And then there really was cause to talk about him taking over. But I think it'll be competitive. He certainly won't be taking anything for granted. And we've already mentioned, there's some good-looking clashes that we can hope to see. The Arkle being one, Champion Hurdle will be really interesting.
Triumph with Hello Neighbour putting his hat into the ring.
I mean, you'd hope that all the novice races would at least, no one's been put off to the extent where they won't even turn up, you'd think. Yep. Everyone will take their chances for those races. The Ryanair looks like it'll have some proper depth. So, like I say, we don't want to hear about any more injuries of the kind that unfortunately Jerry Colombe seems to have suffered. Hopefully everyone else is going to make it to Cheltenham in one piece. Fingers
crossed. For me, I think the changes that they made to the Cheltenham Festival are always already being manifested with the removal of that intermediate novice chase. The Arkle and the Brown Advisory, it's making it a lot easier for punters to figure out. Ballyburn now, you're never going to see him in an Arkle, and Majborough, he's not going to avoid Sergino by going for a different race, and that's going to be a spectacular confrontation between the pair. So can't wait to see how these battles transpire as the season goes on. Things are bubbling up really quite nicely for the Cheltenham Festival in just a couple of weeks' time. We're going to take a quick breather now. Our final story of this week's front page is referring to our Big Punting Survey. To hear more, stay tuned for this.
The Big Punting Survey is back. Punters, it's time to have your voice heard on major betting issues. Plus, you'll automatically be entered into a prize draw for one of 5 £50 Amazon vouchers. Visit racingpost.com/BPS or scan the QR code to take the survey today.
Welcome back to the final instalment of this week's The Front Page, and as mentioned before that brief interlude, now we're going to take some time to talk about our Big Punting Survey and why we need your input and your views. Chris, tell us more.
So this is something that we did at the Racing Post a couple of years ago and got a really big response. It was more than 10,000 people took part. So it became, one of the biggest betting surveys that's ever been done. Certainly the biggest that we've ever done. And it was really interesting and quite influential, as it turned out. The headline that came from it was that 1 in 6 people who responded had already at that point been subjected to affordability checks by at least one bookmaker. And something like nearly 4% had used a black market bookmaker, which again sort of underlined a point that to that point had been in dispute. These are really significant findings, and they help people like the BHA when they go and argue with government or policymakers. It's something for them to point to and show the extent of various problems that punters are facing. The BHA said at the time this was a really important piece of research. And they said, we will strongly encourage government and policymakers to take this data on board. Now, the more people who respond, the bigger impact these things can have, because it gives us more of a chance to point to the results and say, this is a really clear picture of the situation that punters are in at the moment and the problems that they're facing. So, we'd like to encourage as many people as possible to get in touch, to complete the survey, let us know who they are, what their background is, what their interests and concerns are when it comes to betting on horse racing. And then, as I say, we will publish the results, and that'll let all interested parties out there understand a bit more about the situation that they're in. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to complete. It's very easy to find. If you go to the Racing Post website, it's on, I think, the second layer of stories right now. It's called the Big Punting Survey, or if you go into Google, just type Big Punting Survey and it'll be the first thing that comes up. And as I say, just a few clicks. Hopefully the questions are nice and clear, and everyone can take part and let us understand a bit more about their thoughts and concerns.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me is, like you say, this is something that the Racing Post have done before. So at such a pinnacle time for horse race betting, so many changes. We talk about them on this show every week in terms of affordability, restrictions, even the landscape of betting, how it's viewed in Parliament, etc. We're going to see some real tangible results into changes that people have experienced, even in that relatively short period of time since the last survey, and what that's going to teach us about, how satisfied people are when it comes to betting, their experiences. I say satisfied, or probably rather dissatisfied in a lot of cases. And that's going to be really a key integral resource for the sport, for the Racing Post, for everyone going forward, isn't it?
That's very much the idea. I mean, everyone who relies on that data told us at the time it's great to have this, but also do keep doing it from time to time so that we can see how the picture changes over time. One thing, for example, that people from within the sport are thinking about is, who's our audience? If we're trying to advertise to get more followers for horse racing, who should we be pitching this at? What it's like. All these marketing campaigns are aimed at like 20-year-olds. But in reality, I think horse racing's natural audience is significantly older, more experienced than that. And so the survey will help us to understand a bit more about that, about how long people have been following the sport, about what it is that attaches them to it. Is the age profile of the sports audience continuing to go up, or does it stay the same? year after year? You know, is the sport able to find a way of replacing fans with new people, you know, maybe in the 30s or 40s, sort of joining in at that stage? These are all, you know, puzzles that we can unlock if we get a sufficient number of responses to the survey. So it's well worth doing. You'd be really helping the sport out by taking part.
Difficult question for you, John, but what are you expecting to see? I mean, personally, I'm sort of holding my breath a little bit. We know a lot of issues that punters are facing. Are you expecting to be surprised? Are you expecting it to be a very positive response, quite a critical response?
I don't think I'll be surprised at all by the response. I mean, it's important because you get a data set like the first one. It then doubles in value when you're able to compare it to a second data set, which is what we'll have. In terms of satisfaction levels, I don't think it's particularly brave shout to say I think there will be an awful lot more dissatisfaction. I'd imagine punting behaviours will have changed as a result of affordability checks and
by that, do you mean
restrictions. I think
more black market usage?
I think more black market usage. I think probably a reduction in stakes, a reduction in frequency of betting. I can envisage. You know, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope the picture's not quite as bleak as perhaps I'm anticipating it might be. But I certainly think compared to 2 years ago, the punting landscape has changed. And I would just echo what Chris is saying about the importance of this type of work, because so often we talk about these big picture conversations between the sports leaders and government and public policy and everything else. Caught in the middle of that is essentially a punter betting on a sport that they love to follow.
Yeah.
And actually, the more anecdotal evidence, the more data we can get from those people, the better the case that can be taken to those who are ultimately making decisions.
Yeah, I hope this is a case of us being in the racing bubble and working and talking to people experiencing these issues week in, week out, where actually, hopefully the picture's not quite as bleak as we perceive, Chris, but there's no getting away from the fact that, you know, if you are a punter, if you are a lover of racing and you like to bet, you're in a bit of a tricky situation at the moment.
Yeah, obstacles have been thrown in your way, and we have to hope that the attachment to racing and getting involved in it is enough to keep people involved. But I mean, when we did the survey last time, I think 1 in 4 people who responded said they were doing less betting on racing than they had been doing 6 months before. So it'll be interesting to see what the answer to that question is this time. I mean, I think inevitably people are going to be doing less betting than in the past. We had the story, didn't we, at the end of last year about a 3 billion fall in turnover on racing betting annually. No surprise in light of the findings from 2 years ago. So, but we'd like to know where people are now, what they're feeling.
Yeah, and Jonathan and Chris, you are 2 journalists who are regularly speaking to people at the heart of this issue, whether it's key players within the industry or the public. And it's worth mentioning now, Chris, that Josimar Smith, who has been a big contributor to these issues as BHA chair, he's stepping away from his role.
He's handed over the reins to David Jones. I'm afraid his health has deteriorated. He became chair, Joe, in 2022, I think it was, and then the year after that he got diagnosis. He was suffering from lung cancer, and last week he sort of very bravely shared the news that the cancer has spread to his brain. His health has deteriorated, and his lifespan, he said, is pretty limited. He's done a power of work for racing over more than 10 years since he joined the BHA board, I think. And you have to think about the sort of self-sacrifice that he's made in the last 18 months or so, during this time that he's really been suffering. But continued to work really hard for the sport that he has always loved. We have to be extremely grateful for that. I don't think there's any repaying a debt of that kind.
And Jonathan, you've spent time with Joe throughout his role and got to know him better. And what's your reaction to this news?
I think much the same as Chris, really. I think the sport should feel very grateful that we had a Josimar Smith as BHA chair, because he does an awful lot of work, certainly more than the actual brief, purely out of a desire to make the sport better and to try and improve the situation for those in the sport. He's well versed in betting. He understood the game politically. He was perfect for that role, and a fantastic person to have had in it. So he's taken the right decision for him, so you have to be glad of that, but the sport is poorer for not having him in a position of power.
Indeed. Our thoughts with Joe and his family. And now all that's left for me to do on today's show is to nominate our winning story, of course. And I think it has to go to Jonathan. We sort of shared the DRF fallout between us, Jonathan, but you went with the Chasers, and Galopin Des Champs, there's no beating him, is there? Just absolutely spectacular, a flawless racehorse who surely now is going to emulate Best Mate and win a third Gold Cup.
Certainly looks that way, and what an atmosphere as well. I think in terms of the Dublin Racing Festival and its position and how it kind of works as a not a staging post. It's a big festival in its own right, and I think if I was on the marketing team, I'd be clipping up the reaction to Galopin Des Champs and chucking it everywhere on social media, because if that doesn't get people to go racing, I don't know what will.
And some fantastic photographs taken as well from over the weekend from our snappers out at Leopardstown. They're beautiful to see Galopin Des Champs in full flight. And what a nice way to end today's show. As always, if you have any comments, please leave them below. Let us know what you're thinking about all the talking points from the Dublin Racing Festival, and indeed your thoughts on the Big Punting Survey. And we'll see you again in a week's time. Thanks very much.